Okay, I've now outlined the basic concepts of price action, okay? Predominantly talking about supply and demand, and then a small focus on some price action patterns, okay? And why they work and how how to look at things in terms of not looking at your charts of patterns, but searching behind the bars and understanding what they really mean, okay? This is the first video on a trading strategy I use, okay? It predominantly builds on the concepts of supply and demand. So first, just a little bit of a recap. When we've talked about a support resistance zone, we've understood that a support resistance zone consists of pockets of supply and demand zones, okay? So, for example, if we take a support zone, price breaks above that support zone, okay? We are commonly taught that the more times price touches that support zone on the retest, the stronger it is becoming, okay? Now, from what I've discussed and outlined, you should be able to realise that this is completely illogical. It lacks common sense in terms of reasoning. And what is actually happening is each time price comes back to that support zone, it is testing that demand, and each time it reacts, it is consuming some of that demand within that zone. Okay, so that's why you talk about the fifth or sixth touch of a support zone. We're talking about the support zone being weak because of the amount of demand that has been consumed from that support zone. Okay, so a follow on from this is a support zone, which is a demand zone, is at its strongest on the first time price comes back. Okay, it stands the highest chance of having that same supply demand imbalance that caused a breakout on the first retrace than it does compared to, say, the sixth retrace. Okay, now that should be pretty common sense, it's very logical, okay, but it goes against some popular reasoning, popular textbooks and public forums and the internet and what like, okay. Now obviously I've interlinked SR and SD zones here, and it's important to remember, again this is outlined in previous videos and posts on my website, that a support resistance zone is merely cluster of supply demand zones at a similar price, okay, and that a supply demand zone isn't necessarily a support resistance zone, okay. You have a swing high, for example, that is not a resistance zone, is it? It's just it's a demand zone, okay? For support resistance zone, we need multiple touches, multiple supply demand zones at a similar price, okay? Again, this is just a recap of past concepts discussed. So moving on from that, again, just going over some past concepts, we know that a strong supply demand zone is one which resulted in a large imbalance, and we can see that imbalance on a price chart by measuring the strength of the breakout, okay. A high momentum breakout equals a strong supply demand imbalance, okay. So that's when we're looking at the first time back to supply demands, and we want to look at the zones and the SR zone, the SD zones and the SR zones where the initial breakout was very strong, because that tells us that there was a strong supply demand imbalance out of that zone. Therefore, on the first time back, there exists a good probability that that same supply demand imbalance is present, okay. But obviously we want to be looking at the initial breakout being a strong demand imbalance, okay. The stronger the demand imbalance, supply demand imbalance, the better, okay. That should all follow through, is quite common sense reasoning. Okay, so just showing this visually on a chart. Again, this is just a recap of old videos that I've already posted to lead into a trading strategy. Okay, so we have a supply demand zone here. This is a base drop, okay, and we can see within this period here, this consolidation price, the supply demand is in balance, is in balance, not imbalance, in balance, IN, and then price breaks out of this area, and therefore the supply demand has an imbalance, okay, supply exceeding demand, available supply exceeding demand at any given price level, and price breaks with a high momentum, okay. These are the kind of supply demand zones you want to be looking for. Very strong breakout equals very strong supply demand imbalance, therefore we're looking for price to come back on the first retrace, and therefore it stands a good probability of having that same supply demand imbalance and price reacting and moving back down, okay. The same with the support resistance level. We're looking for a very clear support level, okay. We can see multiple touches here. Price has that strong momentum breakout. Again, remember we're looking for the strong high momentum breakout, which tells us there was a strong supply exceeding demand imbalance at this area. Price breaks out, and then we're looking for the first retrace, okay. Other things we're looking for in terms of defining how to trade a first time back is we're not looking for an immediate retrace, okay? We're looking for space between the breakout and the first return, okay? What we commonly refer to as an arc-like pattern, okay? So we want space in terms of the pip distance. If I go back, the pip distance travelled in terms of the breakout length. Okay, we want the strong momentum breakout. Okay, you know, a small breakout here doesn't tell us there's a strong supply-demand imbalance. We want a strong breakout in terms of pip distances, and we want price to stay away from the zone for a material length of time. Okay, we want space in terms of time and distance travelled. Okay, distance travelled from the zone and time travelled between the breakout and the first retrace. Okay, and if these two conditions are met, we expect on the first retrace the same supply-demand imbalance that caused the breakout to be present and price to react away from the zone. Okay. The reason behind wanting the space, the arc-like pattern, is order flow reason, which is something I'll come on to in my next video. So just looking at those two previous examples in terms of what occurred, we had the strong momentum breakout, price travelled a fair distance away from the zone, and also there was space between the breakout and the first return. We have the arc-like pattern, price comes back, reacts, moves away. Same with the DBD, the drop-based drop, supply-demand zone. We had the arc-like pattern, space between the breakout and the first return, and distance between the breakout level and price, where price went away to. Okay. Now the next thing to consider is what defines a suitable supply-demand zone and what defines a suitable support-resistance zone. Okay. Now, as most of you know, and if you don't know, I don't like rule-based trading. Okay, I understand why rule-based mechanical trading is popular. Okay, it makes sense. It's logical that we want to, you know, if price does this, we do X. If price does something else, we do Y. Okay, simple to follow that. But real price action trading isn't about following a set of rules. It's about understanding what price is telling us right now in terms of market participants, in terms of orders that are present at a particular price level. Okay, is understanding what price is telling us right here, right now. Okay, it's about being objective. Okay, using your analysis to reason what price should do and whether that leads to a good probability setup. Okay, so whenever you hear me talking about things, I'm never going to be talking about, okay, if this does that, do that. Okay, that's not what price action trading is about. Okay, it's not how you make some real money in the market. Okay, so when we consider a supply demand zone, okay, what I refer to it, we want one that has substance. Okay, it has to have some meat to it. Okay, it has to have a decent pip range in terms of width, and it has to have a good number of bars. Okay, I don't like sudden reversals on a 1 bar. Okay, 1 bar reversal on a 1 hour time frame might be a nice zone on 5 minutes. That's a different story. Okay, but as a matter of course, I'm always looking at setups around the H1 and H4 timeframes myself, and I'm looking for ones that stand out as ones that I think, yeah, that's going to act as a brick wall to price. Price is going to reverse there, okay? And the same with the support resistance zone. I want ones that are clear. A very clear support resistance zone that is present on multiple timeframes will have multiple participants trading around that SR zone, okay? So if you've got, you know, as I said, I look at H1, H4 mostly. So if I've got a H1 SR level, but it's also clear on H4 daily, for example, that means the participants, market participants that trade by the daily H4 and H1 timeframes are seeing that SR zone. The clearer it is, the more likely they are to see it, and therefore there's a larger population of traders trading around it, and therefore it has a larger concentration of order flow around that zone. And order flow is a reason behind why an FTB setup works in terms of the arc-like pattern, which again I'll come on to that in the second video. So some examples here. We can see here, this is a very clear SR zone, okay? Multiple touches as resistance. We have a false breakout here. And if we look here, we have multiple touches, a very strong high momentum breakout. Price comes back in the arc-like fashion and reacts and goes back to what would typically be considered an obvious FLR, okay, first line of resistance. Okay. Another one, a very clear support zone. We can see how clear it is. multiple touches, price has that strong momentum breakout, comes back in an arc-like pattern. You're not saying, okay, it has to be arc-like, you've got these bars here, okay, that's not arc-like. I'm talking about distance, using common sense and being objective. Distance between breakout and price coming back, and distance between the breakout area and where price went away to. You don't want something coming back around here like this, okay? It's going to be a nice obvious space, okay? And again, price reacts, comes back to a support level. As you can see, actually, price went much further in this case. Another one, again, these kind of support resistance zones just stand out, okay? This one's an obvious one. Support, massive momentum breakout, price comes back, reacts. And, again, this will be something for next video, but notice how it reacts. Very quick momentum in, very quick momentum out, okay? Now, this one, is this an FTB? Well, it's a great support resistance zone. We have a strong momentum breakout, but there's no space, okay? Price has gone away a decent distance in terms of distance from the breakout to the extreme, but there's no space in terms of distance between the breakout area and when price came back, okay? I want to have something coming back like this, okay? Not back. That's an immediate retest, and that's not what we're looking for, okay? And I know I'm going to get questions about this in terms of, okay, well, what's the minimum distance? It's kind of just being objective. Is there space in terms of the distance traveled and the distance between the breakout and price coming back? Okay, I'm looking at maybe price coming back around here, so not a little pattern like this as a minimum, say 5 or 6 bars, but there is no hard and fast rule. You learn more by looking at your charts and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't. Okay, then you get a feel for different pairs and on different time frames and what works and what doesn't. It's about being objective. Okay, is it telling you the order flow behind the setup is present or not? Okay, that's what we need to be asking ourselves. Okay. Now moving on to supply demand zones, we have a rally base drop. We can see we have a clear zone here. You can see this is a support zone in itself which defines the edge of a clear rally base drop, the clear high momentum breakout, space and distance, good momentum move in, good momentum move away. Same again, another rally base drop. We can see the edges here defined on this time frame by these bar lows and closes, space and time, creating that arc-like pattern. Price comes back and drops. Okay. Now, in terms of defining supply demand zone itself, I've been over this in past videos. Okay, in terms of finding decision points, multi-time frame analysis. The same principles apply here. That's why I discussed those points and outlining those concepts first before discussing the trading strategy that uses them. Same here. This time it's a drop base drop. We have a clear zone. It's clearly well defined. Price comes back. Okay, so I'm looking for well-defined zones. I'm not looking for ones that are messy and you can't put a little square behind them. I'm not looking for ones that are small in size, like this kind of little zone here. I'm not looking for ones that are 2 bars along. They've got to have some meat to it. It's got to stand out. You've got to look at the chart and say, yes, that's an obvious supply demand zone that has a good chance of acting as a brick wall to price. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to just go through some examples on a chart. This is on a yen, 1 hour time frame. Okay, firstly, this is the type of zone I'm looking for. Massive momentum breakout. This looks like an NFP style news event. We can see we got clear zone. These bar lows define the zone. This up here, so it's a drop, base, drop, base, drop. Massive space this time. Price comes back here. Massive momentum move into it. Price reacts and moves away. Okay. Now, examples of zones I wouldn't like. This one here. This one, number of bars is okay. It's a clear zone, but the pip distance, okay, it doesn't really stand out to me. Okay, this is a news event move, so I wouldn't be trading it anyway, but it doesn't really stand out to me as an area. I think, yeah, price has a really good chance of being reversed here. Okay, the problem with small zones is if you look at these larger zones, you go back to my previous video on multi-time frame analysis and finding decision points, you'll notice that the obvious zones have multiple decision points. They normally have an edge of the zone, they normally have one or two decision points within the zone, and then they have the initial source of the move near the edge of the zone. And what you'll notice is, in the good zones, price won't come back and hit the source. Okay, the top edge of the zone. Price should either react at the edge or react at a decision point within the zone. But on a good FTB setup, price should not be going and hitting the source of the zone on the first time back. Okay, it should be hitting the edge or decision points within the zone. So I'm always looking at, this is beyond the concept in this video in terms of discussing stop losses, but I'm rarely looking at a stop loss behind the source. I'm looking at the stop loss behind the major decision points within the zone, because I don't expect price to make a major deep retracement into the zone. The problem you have with small zones like this is you're going to have a decision point at the edge of the zone, of course, but then most of the time you're not going to have another decision point. It's the edge of the zone or the source, and that's it. So what you'll find is price normally has a deeper retest, because the edge of the zone is a small zone, therefore it's not as well defined, it's not as a strong supply-demand imbalance at the edge of the zone, and therefore price normally makes a deeper retest into the zone, and sometimes will go beyond the zone, causing a false breakout and before reversing. So it makes it much harder to trade. We have another example here. This is a lovely breakout, but it's a tiny zone. You think about, in terms of a meaty zone like this, what it takes for price to break through this zone is a lot more than what it takes to break through this zone here. And you can see we had a false breakout, price hit supply in here before reversing, so that makes it much harder to trade in terms of entries and stop losses. Okay, doesn't mean they don't work, but I'm focused on looking at the meaty zones, the clear support resistance zones that I know stand a very good chance of reversing price, and I can identify exactly where I expect price to reverse and where it won't go to, and therefore I can be more precise with my entry and stop losses, which helps in terms of risk reward. Okay, so again, you have to be objective, because obviously different pairs, different time frames will make more sense in terms of defining what is a good zone and what isn't. You should be able to look at it and look at past zones. So I can look at this zone, I can look at this zone, and I can compare it to a zone like that and say, well, these are two meaty zones. These clearly aren't relative to these. So you have to look back over pairs and look at what makes sense in terms of identifying zones that are meaty and have substance and that work, and zones that have a lower chance of work. It doesn't mean they're not tradable, but for the purposes of what I'm trying to outline here, I'm looking at the ones that have substance. Okay, so we have another example here: rally, base, drop, very big zone, clear substance to it, good momentum move in, price reverses, comes back out. Now we have one here. This again would be a zone which I would say doesn't have enough substance. It's very small, it's the same kind of size as this, and it doesn't have much in terms of number of bars within it as well. It might look clear on the 30-50 minute, this is 1 hour time frame, but on this time frame I'm not marking this as a zone I'm looking to trade straight away as a straightforward FTB. Okay, I'm marking up setups on 1 hour, 1 hour, 4 hour and daily, ones that are just obvious to me on those time frames, and then I'm using some of the concepts I've discussed before to zoom in and try and find decision points and pinpointing entries and stop losses. Okay, now here we have another one. This one does have meat. It's not as clear as this one, not as clear as this one obviously, and the breakout distance isn't as clear. Obviously this is a second time back to this zone here, but it still has some substance to it. Okay, now in terms of the space, this is probably the minimum I would accept on this pair. Okay, in terms of the arc-like pattern, it's travelled enough distance, but the space between the breakout and the return is just about acceptable. Okay, it just visually looks just about acceptable. I'm saying, well, it has travelled a decent distance, there is space here, there is an arc-like pattern, it's just about acceptable. Is it as clear as a setup like this one or this one? No. Okay, but does it mean it's not tradable? Definitely not. It doesn't mean it's not tradable. It doesn't mean these zones aren't tradable. But in terms of looking at the obvious zones, this one would just about qualify. And as you can see, price had a deeper retracement before a very strong breakout from this zone, and that's the problem you have with the zones that aren't clearly obvious. The chances of a deeper retracement, even a false breakout before reversing, or even just not working, is much higher than the zones like this one and this one. Okay. Now moving on to a couple of SR levels. This is Euro Dollar, 15-minute time frame. We can see here a very clear support resistance zone. Okay, support, support, support. We can see support rejection here, and then we have the strong momentum breakout. We have the arc pattern. Price comes back on the first time back and reacts. Okay, Now compare this to this zone here. Now, at a glance, you say, well, this one's just, this one's it's a clear support resistance zone. Obviously, you've got to ignore the timing after this area. But if you look more closely, you say, well, price hasn't exactly reacted well here. In terms of a good support resistance area will be very crisp. If you look at the support rejections here, they are very crisp. Okay, hits it, rejects, hits it, rejects, hits it, breaks out. Okay, if you look at it here, hits it, breaks through, rejects a little bit, comes back, breaks it, actually closes below it, depending on how you define the zone, then rejects it. It's very wishy-washy. It's not very crisp. Same here. Rejects it, moves below it, very small rejection, again comes back, closes, then we have the breakout. It's not as clear as one like this. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for ones that say, yeah, I can draw that zone within seconds. I can go there, I can take my line, I can go, yep, that's a zone, bang. Okay, this one I'm kind of looking at and going, well, do we say it's down here? Do we say, it's more up where I drew it? Is it higher? Is it below these ones? It's not as obvious. And then we come back and see, well, it's actually just a resistance. But again, we have a 1 bar high here. We have a bar coming close here. We have another lower bar. It's kind of, where do you draw it? Here, here, here. If it's not clear to me, that means it's not clear to other people. That means the order flow concentration around this SR isn't as strong as one where you can just go, yep, that's the support resistance. Okay. So this is not one I would like for an FTB because of the clarity and crispness of the SR. Okay, again, price comes back. It does have a small reaction. Okay, again, this is acceptable distance and just about acceptable space in terms of time. It does have a small reaction, but it's not one I would consider a good, the highest probability of trades in terms of what I'm trying to get people to identify in terms of the very obvious support resistance zones and very obvious supply demand zones. Okay, and just looking, or we look on this time frame, we can see we have a very clear supply demand zone here. It has a lot of substance in terms of width, has a nice number of bars. It's a very clear drop base rally, very well defined. Price comes back, reacts. Okay, so we have an FTB that causes a short, an FTB reverses for the long. And if I zoom in to 5 minutes, you can see how the major decision point within the zone, apart from the edge down here, is actually what causes the reaction. Okay. Well, that pretty much sums up what I wanted to go through in the first video. Okay, in terms of the basic logic of why the first time back holds the strongest probability, the highest probability of causing the same supply demand imbalance and price reacting. Okay, and then how to identify what types of zones and types of SR zones have the best chance of making for a good FTB setup. Okay, that's all I basically wanted to go through in this video. The next video will go into more depth on order flow and entries and stop losses. Okay.